Geeks and geekettes, gats and gittens. It's Wednesday morning. It's time for another Ask Chuck Dixon. Sorry I wasn't here last week, but I was stuffed with turkey and I couldn't move, let alone talk or make sense. Anyway, that's half true. Let's get to your first question about what I do for a living. And what I do for a living is I write comic books. Samwise 9. I found the Nightfall and No Man's Land crossovers to be similar in the way that they both have very strong beginnings and endings, but meander a little bit in the middle. Is there something in the nature of a big crossover events that causes this? I think it's in the nature of storytelling, that in the middle of the story, it's what every writer dreads. That middle passage, that getting from the really cool introduction of a concept to its resolution. To the big climax scene, to the scene with all the explosions. It's the horse latitudes of writing. Your imagination is becalmed because you've got to fill this middle part of the story with something as interesting as the beginning, and hopefully they'll keep on reading to the end. I mean, that's the job of a writer, to keep you reading, and you can't, unless you're writing a samurai story, simply skip the middle part. I argue that most samurai movies have only two acts. The samurai gets pissed off, the samurai kills everybody. That's the classic form. There's really no middle part where he wonders about life or meets a new love. But, it's one of the difficulties of writing. It's one of the challenges of writing to keep things interesting. An example I often use is The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Good, the Bad, and the Ugly has three killer openings as we introduce each of the three main characters, the good, the bad, the ugly. Clint Eastwood, Lee Van Cleef, and Eli Wallach. And we know from pretty much the first 20 minutes of the film that everybody's looking for this gold cache, this buried gold. Hidden by someone in the Confederate Army. And each of the three characters know part of the resolution. Each of the three characters know something about the location of the gold, but none of them all know the same thing, so they can't find it. So Sergio Leone and his writers fill the middle passage, the usually boring or slower part of a story, with these terrific series of betrayals and temporary alliances and complications. And the whole time you're forgetting about the gold. You get more involved in these three characters and their turbulent interrelations than you do in thinking about their quest. And quest stories are tough because all you're thinking about is the quest. Think Lord of the Rings. And that was the brilliant thing about Lord of the Rings as well. Tolkien was a genius. Instead of having his characters go to find something, he has their characters going to throw something away. So we already know what the something is, but we don't know how are they going to destroy this thing. And again, Tolkien fills his story with betrayals, and Gollum plays a large part in creating complications in the story. Chases, fights, everything else. So you got to make sure when you're writing that it's all equally interesting and equally engaging. And I agree. In an event as long as No Man's Land, an event as long as Nightfall, and you have disparate writers, disparate creative teams, you're going to run into a few slow spots here and there in the story. It's got to happen because the story's long. I would argue that even the Iliad and the Odyssey, classics of Western literature, have their dry passages. So you get to the cool stuff at the end. So, hey, it's a Samwise 9 twin spin. He doesn't seem very excited about it, though. Okay, ironically, the character Anarchy is conspicuously absent from Batman No Man's Land. I wonder if this is due to Alan Grant being taken off Shadow of the Bat title just before the crossover began. I think this was a bit of a missed opportunity. What do you think he would have done with the character in that setting had he still been writing the book? Yeah, I think the simple You've got it. I mean, Alan was taken off of the core Batman books along with Doug Mensch and I, all at the same time. We were all fired on the same day. It was because of low sales. Sales were starting to dip, and DC thought it was time for a change. Although none of the changes really worked. So, yeah, Anarchy wasn't included in No Man's Land because Anarchy is a character so associated with Alan Grant that I don't think anybody else wanted to touch it. He's a character created by Grant, and he was very close to Alan's worldview. Alan was you never knew where Alan was going to fall at any given time on any given subject. You could never second guess. I think Alan would say this. No one would ever say that if that knew Alan. So he had his own way of thinking, a truly individual mindset, and Anarchy is the result of that. So no one was going to touch it in No Man's Land. Had Alan been a part of No Man's Land, yeah, I think Anarchy would have been there, absolutely, and he would have been a disruptor in the events, as he always was in his stories. Hokum, I know you're a huge fan of Westerns, and I'm curious if you have an opinion on the two that Tarantino made. They may not technically be Westerns, but Django Unchained and The Hateful Eight are in that theme. I was just wondering if you have any thoughts on them. Well, they are Westerns. I've heard this said before that these aren't Westerns. No, they are. They very much are. Both of them. And Tarantino's a big Western fan. And I mean, he's a Western fan like I'm a Western fan. He loves them all. He loves the singing cowboy Roy Rogers types Westerns. And he likes, the spaghetti Westerns. He likes every kind of Western you can imagine. TV Westerns. And he and I could probably share a long car ride just talking about Rawhide. But Django Unchained is a classic, revenge Western. And, Tarantino is such a Western freak that he didn't want to use any effects. He wanted to film these movies, and he filmed them on film, as they might have filmed them in the, 50s, 60s, or 70s. That tremendous explosion sequence where all the horses fall and the men fall off of them. The vigilantes all get blown up. That was all real. He got real stuntmen, real cowboys, real horse wranglers, and they did those amazing shots live in camera, which no one does anymore. And no horses were harmed because they train the horses to fall. They're horses that just love their job of falling down. I like this movie. It's a mean, nasty Western revenge film. Especially, oddly, we just talked about the middle passage of the story. I like the middle part of the story the most, with Jamie Foxx and Chris Walls basically doing what they do. That amazing sequence where they're going to ambush these guys at a ranch, and it's supposed to be Django's first kill as a bounty hunter. And but then we get to Hateful Eight. If you were to wake me up at 4 a.m. and say, what movie, don't even think about it, what movie do you wish you could unsee? And it would be Hateful Eight. Huge disappointment for me. I mean, shot on 70mm, awesome cast, Tarantino doing a Western again, big budget, and this movie is a freaking mess. This movie is all middle passage. 99% of this film is people sitting around waiting for something to happen. And it's very, very sad. This movie should have had more action, been moved around a little bit more, and been shorter. And I understand that a lot of the things that happen in this film are as a result of the screenplay being hacked and put on the internet. And they made a lot of changes to the movie. And I think they were changes that didn't help it be an entertaining film at all. And I think, they put a lot of shock elements that were unnecessary and frankly quite unpleasant in the film. And things that to me felt very un-Tarantino, to be quite frank. And I don't understand why, because seriously, how many people read the screenplay on the internet? And they were going to go see the movie anyway. How many people really spoiled this film for anybody? Especially in these days. Maybe today with YouTubers rushing to make videos that spoil films they've seen or films that events have been leaked. But, when Hateful Eight was in production, that really wasn't a big thing. And I think it was silly to alter the film. I actually want to read the original screenplay now to see if it would have been a better film. But the thing is that both of these movies are inspired by, a lot of, films that came before. There's a phrase I hate, and it's used all the time. Anytime anybody makes a Western these days, they call it a revisionist Western. They call it Unforgiven a revisionist Western. There's nothing revisionist about Unforgiven or Django Unchained. These are standard classic Westerns. But they call them revisionist because they deal with more adult, more mature themes. They're dealing with deeper subject matter. But that's not new to Westerns. In the 50s, which for me was a prime era for the Western genre, I mean, you had Jimmy Stewart made a series of films with Anthony Mann that plumbed the depths of human psychology and aberrant human behavior. I mean, Jimmy Stewart in some of these films is near psychotic in his behavior. He's still the good guy, but he's driven, obsessed. These are Greek tragedies set in the West, and certainly explore deeper themes. Delmer Daves made a couple of films in the Western genre, 3:10 to Yuma and Jubal, both with Glenn Ford, that do the same thing. They explore the human psyche. 3:10 to Yuma in particular is an action Western, but it's also a bit of a psychological thriller. And certainly not revisionist, because what is a Western? It is a story of conflict that is resolved through violence. And that's as simple as I can get. And that's why people love Westerns, because the form is simple, they understand it, and it's malleable. You can stretch it and do all kinds of things with it. The same can be said for the last films, the last 5 or 6 films made by Randolph Scott with his own production company, using the same writer and director, Burt Kennedy and Bud Bodeker, on all of 6 films. And these two explore themes that were very mature, very adult. These stories are a bit dark. Well, not a bit dark, they're quite a bit dark and noirish, and they're worth checking out. The last films of Randolph Scott before he retired, Ride Lonesome, The Tall T, Buchanan Rides Alone, and what is it? Yeah, can't remember the last one. Comanche Station, which is Clint Eastwood's favorite Western. Next question, Craig Giles. Do you have any stories that you feel are underrated and don't get the recognition they deserve? Not in an egocentric way, but just wish they had reached a wider audience. Yeah, Joker's Devil's Advocate is the one. I've spoken about this a bunch of times. I probably even answered this question before, but Joker's Devil's Advocate by me and Graham Nolan. I really wish it had reached a broader audience. Graham and I worked very hard on this story. We worked hard on everything we did, but this one was more intense. We actually met in New York for a few days to hash out the plot line and everything else. Graham was very, very much the co-writer on this one, and I needed his assistance because it's a rather complex whodunit mystery in the end, as well as what we felt would be a classic Joker story, and also answer the question, why doesn't Batman just kill Joker? So it sort of explores Joker's psyche as much as you can, because the Joker reinvents himself every day, but it also explores Batman's motivations and, exactly where does his moral compass stand on a lot of issues like the death penalty and, abuses of the law and the rule of law itself. And I wish more people had read it. I wish that DC had marketed it better. They kind of marketed it as, hey, the 2 guys that are doing Detective Comics every month have a really expensive hardcover volume they want you to buy. I think some people thought that it would eventually be serialized in the Detective and didn't buy it. It didn't help that DC really didn't push it very much, advertise it very much, and they didn't keep it in print. or included in collections, omnibuses about the Joker. And as much as they exploit the Joker and Batman at DC, you'd think they would want to keep pumping this one out, even if it meant including it in a volume with other Joker stories. But they didn't, they don't, and what are you going to do about it? But try and find it. They're rather expensive when you do, but check it out. Graham and I are extraordinarily proud of this book. Jeff Padigo. Who killed Dudley Soames after you left DC? I thought he was an excellent Batman-esque villain with a great gimmick, and he had a fully realized backstory. So I was surprised when they killed him off. Was they writer Devin Grayson or editor Michael Wright, or the whole affair has just never smelled right? Thanks. Yeah, that's one of those nobody leave this room mysteries. Dudley Soames, also known as Torque, former chief police inspector at Bloodhaven, who gets his head turned around, literally, by Blockbuster and somehow survives with his head on backwards. He was kind of my, second to Blockbuster, the main nemesis for Nightwing. And of course, he blames Nightwing for his fate. He doesn't blame Blockbuster. And the other character being Tad Ryerstad, Nightwing. That's Nightwing with a hyphen. Who is a total psychopath, obsessed with justice. And of course, justice is in the eye of the beholder, and in Tad's eye, it's anybody he doesn't like has to be punished. And he has this twisted idea that he's going to be a superhero, this fantasy, and so he runs around in a hockey jersey and a mask, and he's going to imitate his hero Nightwing. And when the two of them met, it was never pleasant. And he's to me the perfect villain, the guy who thinks he's doing right, and he isn't. He's a twisted jerk. He's not real bright, but he had a backstory as well of obviously child abuse, substance abuse, and everything else. Now, as to who killed him, in my last issue of Nightwing, I had Tad Ryerstad and Dudley Soames enter a room, and there's gunshots, and I didn't resolve it. I left it completely open. I had no idea what I was going to do next, because I wasn't going to do anything next. I was handing the book over to Devin Grayson. I was not going to resolve the storyline. And when Michael Wright called me and said, well, who survives? I said, well, I'm leaving it up to Devin. Now, whether Devin decided that Dudley Soames must die, or Michael Wright told her that's who he wanted to die. I mean, it was editorially driven. I don't know. I don't know to this day. I wouldn't envy anybody taking over the Dudley Soames character. So maybe Devin just chose the path of least resistance, because so she wouldn't have to mimic or imitate or somehow figure out what my voice for Dudley Soames was. Tad Ryerstad, from my point of view, as a writer coming in cold, if I were to come in cold on these characters, I would think, well, Tad's the easier of the two to write, and actually had more story. I think Dudley Soames' story was kind of over at this point, but Tad Ryerstad was, infinitely fascinating as, this brutal moron who could enter the story at any time, as an agent of chaos. So whoever picked it, I think they made the right choice. Probably made the choice I would have made. I would have had a hard time killing Tad, because I both loathe and like him at the same time. So we'll never know unless I run into Devin or Michael Wright sometime and ask them. Cool Guy 9000. What do you think of Jonah Hex and his stories? Recently, I've tried reading his comics through trades and omnibuses, but DC has done a terrible job of collecting them, only releasing one omnibus every decade or so, with the first two being in black and white, and the third being a colored version of the first. Why do you think this is? Well, I really, I don't know. I can't tell you why DC reprints what they reprint and why they do it in the formats they do. I mean, there was a recent DC War collection, which I thought was very odd, because all of the awesome DC War comics there were, and they reprinted some stuff that was actually pretty lame. It was like latter day pale imitations of the classic stuff. of the 60s and 70s. But, I think mostly they have people doing these collections who are disinterested in the material. And, I assume it's based on sales, but, I know the volumes you're talking about. And if they did 2 showcase volumes of Jonah Hex, it means the first one sold. They don't do a second volume of something if the first one didn't sell. So there probably is an audience. I mean, there is an audience for Jonah Hex out there. But do they want to explore it? And that's always been the problem for Jonah Hex, is the disinterest that DC has shown to the character. If you don't know who Jonah Hex is, he came about in the early 70s. Tough guy, Western character, scarred, mean, vengeful, vindictive. Just a nasty piece of work, a real anti-hero created to be an anti-hero, and ran for a long time in starting in Weird Western, and ran for a long time in his own comic, which was one of DC's top-selling titles. In the 70s, their superhero titles were bottom basement sales-wise. No one was buying Superman, Batman, Green Lantern, and the rest. Their biggest sellers were their, quote-unquote horror comics, which really weren't that horrible. They were more mystery comics, but those sold well. Supernatural comics, I should say. And their war comics, they had 5 war titles all through the 70s, whereas Batman and Superman only had 2 each. And Jonah Hex. Jonah Hex sold very, very well. He sold, sometimes, some months he was their #1 title. So there was an enormous audience for these Western stories. And I liked them. Michael J. Fleischer writes most of the run. I only lost interest as a reader when Hex gets married. Always a mistake. And they kind of have him settle down. I didn't, I kind of lost interest in the book at that point. But, the artwork is terrific. Tony DiZuniga, Louis Dominguez, Jose Garcia Lopez. Just does, they're doing fantastic work on this stuff. And a lot of people say, well, Jonah Hex was inspired by the spaghetti westerns, and maybe in part that's true, but I really think, I really think they were more inspired by a series of very, very mean, very, very brutal, very, very cynical, and violent westerns that came out, produced by American companies in the early 70s. Movies like The Hunting Party, Valdez is Coming, Chado's Land, Lawman, and others. And these were like standard Western stories, but with a really nasty turn. I mean, Hunting Party was rated R. The rest of these were rated PG, but remember, they were 1970s PG, which would be an instant R today. But they were very violent, very bloody, with conflicted characters and lots of nasty goings on. And I really think that this is where Hex comes from. And another proof of Hex's popularity was that he was collected into digest-sized comics on 3 occasions. So that's another testimony that he was a well-read, very popular character amongst readers, that they would collect his stories into these digest volumes, which at the time were one of the few profitable areas of publication DC was doing. And you can't talk about Hex without talking about the Jonah Hex Dollar Spectacular. DC was doing these dollar comics with no ads at the time, trying to fight for their place on the newsstand against like Time Magazine and Newsweek with the dollar comic. Newsstand owners at the time were complaining that comics were cheap and they were taking up too much space for the return. So DC, in particular, started doing more expensive dollar editions. And this one's remarkable. It's 100 pages of all new Western stories featuring DC Western characters. But the most amazing part of it is the lead Jonah Hex story, drawn by Russ Heath, written by Michael J. Fleischer. And it is the last Jonah Hex story, because Hex dies in this story. And it's just terrific. I mean, it is the perfect ending to the Jonah Hex saga. And if you've never read it, you need to seek it out. I have no idea what these things go for on eBay, but you should be able to find a reader's copy for a decent amount of money, because I think this thing sold well, so it had a pretty high print run. Johnny McCloskey, you mentioned that you will bind the comics you've worked on. If you don't mind me asking, what company do you use to do the binding? My personal favorite bindery is closed down. I'm looking for a new company. Well, I'm sort of in the same boat as you. For years, I was getting my stuff bound by a company in Reading, Pennsylvania. But the last time I gave them stuff to bind, they did a really crappy job. I don't know if they were under new management or they just hired a bunch of seriously untalented binders, because they actually bound 3 volumes with the issues all in the wrong order. Whereas, when you send stuff to the bindery, there's forms to fill out. So they understand exactly what you want. So there's 0 mistakes made. So I just stopped using that bindery because they suck. So if you hear, or anybody watching this hears about a place that does great work binding comics, I'd love to hear, because I've got maybe a 5-year backlog of comics sitting around in stacks, waiting to be bound. And the reason why I bind them at first was so I have ready reference. Also, so that I know I have at least one copy of every comic I've written. And I can assure that by having them bounded up on a shelf. They can't be broken up. Because when you get comps and stuff, you start giving them away to people as gifts. And you lose track, and then one day you find out you don't have issue 4 of Captain Potato Salad, and now you got to go on eBay and buy your own comic book. So that's the original reason for binding, and where I got the idea of binding was I read an interview with John Severin about his EC, his work at EC, and he mentioned the fact that he had all of his comics bound. That as a stack formed, he sent it off to the bindery. And I thought, whoa, what a cool idea. If I ever become a comic book writer, that's what I'm going to do. And that's what I did. So yeah, if you hear of a good bindery, anybody, Bueller, let me know. Okay, Christopher Hernandez. I was listening to a Tim Truman interview, and he mentioned Four Winds Publishing while he was working for Eclipse. Seemed like a power team up with yourself and him doing comics. He said you sold your shares and left after a year or 2. Was it just personal business move or just overworked? He had no hard feelings or ill words about you. Tim seems like a chill, understanding guy. Yeah, Four Winds kind of, why is that like that? Well, I'm going to skip to the next picture. I had a picture of all of us in Chicago and I didn't blow it up. So, and I'm doing these things live, baby. These things are done off the cuff. There's no rehearsal. There's no setup. Anyway, Four Winds Publishing grew out of like a gang of us that began hanging out together because we shared interests and everything else. And Tim was kind of the center of the group. And, pencilers, inkers, colorists, letterers, just guys doing comics. And we were all basically starting our careers at roughly the same time. A number of them were Kubert School graduates, or Kubert School attendees. I don't know many Kubert School graduates. So, and Tim went to the Kubert School, did not graduate. He and I were simpatico. We had a lot of things in common. We had a lot of things that we didn't have in common, but we liked comics, and we liked a lot of the same comics. So it was his idea to form this Four Winds imprint at Eclipse that eventually became a full-fledged publisher with some investment from me and him. We figured out the details and did all the solicitations. Back in those days, it involved a lot of Xeroxing, because in those days there were a number of distributors. There wasn't just Diamond, and if you sent them bundles of ad stuff, promo stuff, they would include it with their catalog. They just throw it in with the catalog so retailers could see it and possibly order your stuff. So we did a lot of that. I always kind of suspected that we were Xeroxing this material and bundling it off, and it was no retailer ever saw it because it wasn't in the distributor's interest to throw it in the packets. And how would we know if they just tossed it in the dumpster? But sales were okay. I think we broke even or made a little bit of profit on each book. And the whole idea was to, well, for me anyway, I wasn't interested in the business end any more than Tim was. I was more interested in this as a creative outlet. One of the reasons I left is because it really wasn't a creative outlet for me. Most of the new work that we did was Tim writing and drawing. We did some reprint stuff because I had an association with a studio, a publisher in Argentina, and a lot of friends amongst Argentine artists. And so we did a couple of collections of Alcatena's work, a collection of Juan Zanotto, and then we published 2 volumes of Atu, a sort of sci-fi fantasy adventure story by the great Sam Glanzman. But, the wheels kind of came off where you'll notice here that there's nothing that I wrote and had drawn. And I kept proposing things and getting shot down by my partner. And that's when I realized I'm not going anywhere here. I mean, we're supposed to be equal partners. We're supposed to be equals. I don't think Tim saw us that way. I think he saw me as the guy who would end up doing all the paperwork while he, he went on doing his own comics, his own creations. So basically, I was partnered with my own gatekeeper. And I thought, well, I'm not getting anywhere here. I can go off on my own with the projects that I want to do at Four Winds because I can interest other publishers in these and actually get them to see the light of day. And so, we parted company. I divested myself and left him with the Xerox machine and took off for greener pastures. So that's the story of Four Winds. And lots of our friends and stuff were so disappointed because they thought we were like the next Beatles of comics or something. Like we were gonna, move the earth and change everything. I don't think that was going to happen. I didn't care about that. I didn't want to be a big player in the comic book business, and I don't think that Tim wanted that either. I think we both just wanted a creative outlet for stuff without having to pitch. We wanted to do what we wanted to do. And it ended because I wasn't getting to do what I wanted to do. Simple as that. Hey, if you want to get a hold of me, you can email me at brunobookstore@gmail.com. Questions, suggestions, pictures of your doggies and kitties, pictures of shelves full of your own bound books. I don't care. And this is the most direct way to reach me. I never miss a question here. Now you can ask questions below this video. You can ask me questions on Facebook or Twitter, but chances are I might miss them. But I'm not going to miss it if you send it here. And hey, while I got you, you might want to check out Midnight's War. It is a vampire epic. It's a Kickstarter. It's by me and Vox Day. It presents an alternate universe where vampires are the ruling class. They are not only the apex predator on the planet, they're running things. They're the politicians and businessmen, and the rest of us are just cattle and serfs to these undead ruling class. And my portion of this is the creation of Kyle Buckner, a former soldier who becomes a cop. A human cop who's kind of the day watch for the vampires. And he gets involved in all kinds of adventures and mysteries. It's a police thriller set in a world ruled by vampires, and will have a spinoff. I've already written 2 issues of Midnight's War Night Streets, which will be out following the printing of this graphic novel. People have been asking for a while, when is Arctoons going to start printing some of the material that show up on the Arctoons webcomic site? And this is the first of many. Now, the project I'm working on is Rambo in First Kill. And it's a comic done by Splato Comics, written by me and Sylvester Stallone, or Sylvester Stallone and me properly, and has some incredible artwork by a fantastic team of artists, include Butch Geis, Matt Barr, Aaron Afflesh, and it's in the coloring stages right now, and it is available. Let's get this up here. It is available on Indiegogo as an in-demand. We've already reached our goal, but if you want a copy of this graphic novel, which will be in full color, it's with the colorist now, probably in the final stages of coloring off to the printers, should be in the hands of supporters early in 23. And it's cool stuff. It's Rambo's first tour in Vietnam, and it is a stand-up, gutsy war story. A lot of the incidents in this story are based on events described to me by vets who served in Vietnam, who told me these stories firsthand, and I incorporated some of the elements of their stories into this. So if you ever wanted to know how John Rambo became the man he appeared to be in the movies, this is your opportunity in comic form. So check that out at Indiegogo. And that's it for me this week. I want to thank you for watching, listening, liking, subscribing, spreading the word, and supporting any of these projects. And I really appreciate it. So look for the links below to all the stuff I talked about here, and I'll see all of you